Hi, this is Krishna from Informatica Support, and today's session will be discussing about how to deal with a session crash which is happening in FetchCPUStats method and how to overcome this session crash. To start off with, in this video presentation we'll understand how to debug a session crash in FetchCPUStats and what are the logs we need to collect and how do we analyze those logs, and then what is the solution to overcome this issue. Typically in an enterprise application, we will be seeing in a power center setup, the integration service will be running on a grid on multiple nodes, and when the workflow is scheduled, the session sometimes crashes, and it won't come up, and then it generates a core. By looking at the logs, we will be able to determine where the crash is, and in this particular session I'm taking up a scenario where the crash was seen in FetchCPUStats. So the first log we will be interested to look at is the IS log and the strace taken along with the PM stack on the core file which is generated. So if you see the IS log, so this is a sample output from the customer environment where we are seeing the session actually terminated, and the error messages is recorded in the IS log. So here it's an instance where in the IS log the session task is trying to run, and it has thrown an error and terminated after throwing an instance of stdio base failure. So stdio base failure is API from standard input output standard library which is a part of the operating system. So in order to get more details in terms of where the underlying crash is coming from, we need to look at the PM stack output on the core file which is generated. So this requires the settings need to be done in order to ensure a core file can be generated, and running a PM stack on it will give us a stack. So the stack looks like this. So we are seeing a crash which is happening here about being called, and that resulted in the termination of the session. If you look at the stack, we are trying to get the DTM, that is the session process is getting instantiated, and in due course we are calling a method where we are trying to get the process stats, and we are trying to collect those statistics. So this will be the case in the scenario where we will have the session we will have integration service which is running on a grid, and in order to instantiate a session, the power center will look at the process stats, and it will collect the statistics from each of these nodes and determine on which node the session should be dispatched and it should be triggered. So in this process we are seeing that during the FetchCPUStat, it has internally called basic IOS, which is a standard input output package. Calling the function clear resulted in an IOS failure. So throw IOS failure is a method which if it is invoked, it means that it has created an exception object. Exception object will be created when one of the IOS method has encountered an errors in either reading or writing from the stream, so when performing operations on the stream. So the underlying method, which is a part of standard IO package, is a clear, and when you are doing a clear, running a clear method, we have encountered error, and that resulted in exception in the iOS failure object, and that resulted in the termination. We call terminate method here, and the verbose terminate handler is a handler which will invoke the handler for when an exception object is created, and it will terminate the process. So that's the reason why the session process PMDTM could not come up, and it resulted in a termination. If we are able to take a stress during the entire course of an action, it will give us an indication of what was the operation being done at that instance, and it will help us to get more details. Going back to the presentation, so we looked at how we can analyze the logs, and in order to address this issue, what is the change that need to be done in order to address this crash. So this requires a configuration change. I'll show you how this can be done. So there is a property in the domain where we actually decide what will be the dispatch mode. So the dispatch mode will have 3 options. Let me log in. So we see that we can actually set one of the 3 options of a dispatch mode. We have round robin, and we have metrics based, and we have adaptive based. So each of these options will make use of yeah, this is the page. So each of this dispatch mode has the pros and cons. So the round robin, if you set a dispatch mode as round robin, the load balancer dispatch tasks to the available node in a round robin fashion. Whereas in metrics based or adaptive based, the load balancer tries to evaluate nodes, and based on the available resources, and in which case we will see that it also need to fetch the CPU statistics, and what are the resources which are allocated, what is the consumption at this point, and based on that the dispatch of the job will be done. In order to overcome a crash which is happening in FetchCPUStats, one of the simple option is to make use of round robin mode in the dispatch mode, and then set this. You need to restart UI server, and whenever next instance it runs, it uses round robin mode, in which there won't be any statistical collection of CPU. So that will change the course of the path, and hence the crash will not be seen. Going back to the PowerPoint slide. So in summary, we discussed on how to debug a session crash if it is happening in FetchCPUStats, and what are the logs we need to collect, and how to look at those logs, and what is the solution to overcome if the crash is happening in FetchCPUStats. So if this is a production environment, it will be, as a quick relief, changing the dispatch mode will help. Moving to round robin will avoid taking the path where the CPU stats will be collected, and the workflow can run once again without any session crashes. That's all I have from this video. We'd love to hear from you. You can write to us at supportvideos@informatica.com, or follow us on Twitter account InfaSupport. Thank you.